In this short video, I'm going to discuss the benefits of using shutter priority, which is another natural progression from using the P mode on your camera. You know, as you've probably guessed with these videos, it's all about actually getting beyond the auto modes and taking a little bit of control of your camera. So we're going to look at shutter priority. Now, as the name dictates, shutter priority controls the shutter of your camera, which really means it's controlling the speed of your camera. Now you can see from this shot, I've set the shutter speed to 1,000th of a second. I'm going to take the shot, and now I'm going to drop it down to 500th of a second. Now I'm going to drop it to 250, 125, 60, 30th of a second, 15, 1/8, quarter, half, and I think we'll leave it at 1 second. As the name implies, shutter priority means that you're prioritising the shutter speed of your camera. Now what this means is you will decide the shutter speed and your camera will work out an aperture accordingly, and it will also work out an ISO that's required to keep everything nicely exposed, which is the same as for aperture priority, and I'm going to look more into this in a future video. But it's just worthwhile keeping in mind because auto ISO is actually quite important in this mode. Now, what I just showed you was a prime example of why you might want to use shutter priority, that you might want to try and choose a shutter speed to try and blur water. But you know, it's also very useful for if you actually want to shoot some handheld shots. For example, I'm going to remove the camera from the tripod, and I'm just going to take a couple of shots handheld, one at 1 second, another at a 30th a second, one at 60th, 125, 250, 500th. And what you will see is that it's very hard to keep a camera shake free at the longest shutter speed. Now if I'd have been in aperture priority, I could have decided I wanted to say f8 because I want to try and get as much in focus as I could think required, and the camera would choose a shutter speed which is too slow for me to keep it steady handheld. But by putting it to shutter priority, and if I select, let's say 250th of a second as a nice fail-safe option, and I can just go like this, and hopefully everything will be sharp. And this is the beauty of shutter priority. This is what makes it such a flexible option. If you're walking around a town, for example, you could set your camera to, say, 250th of a second, and you're pretty much good to go all day, unless it gets too bright. And if it gets too bright, what you will find is that your aperture can't shut down enough to block out the light. So your shots are overexposed, and that's irregardless of whether you've got auto ISO on or not, because auto ISO can only go as low as your base ISO setting, which is 64 on this. So that means shutter priority is a good all-round walk-around mode, but you still have to keep an eye on the settings. Now, something to keep in mind if you're using shutter priority is that if you're photographing a moving subject, you actually want your shutter speed to be fast enough to freeze that action. Now, as you would have seen with that sequence of running water, there was a certain point where it was froze perfectly. Now, if you were photographing, say, sports or moving vehicles, you may need a pretty fast shutter speed, 500th of a second, 1000th of a second, to freeze that action. And sometimes if you're shooting portraits, and I find this quite often with weddings, if somebody's moving a hand, even at 125 of a second, you can get a little bit of hand blur. So ideally 250 of a second or faster would be better. And it's just something to keep in mind. But shutter priority is a very useful mode if you need to control the speed of your shot. Hopefully from this video you will have learned that shutter priority is actually a very useful mode if you want to take control of the shutter speed of your camera. Be that either to freeze action or to creatively blur it, or simply so you don't have camera shake from you moving. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you would like to see more, please do consider subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you soon for another 5-minute photo school.